For nearly 3 decades, Diana's ghost has haunted this palace. But in 2025, her spirit returned not as a whisper, but as a weapon. And what followed shattered the monarchy's foundations in blood, betrayal, and fire. Stay with us, because what you are about to hear is not just history. It is the reckoning. Subscribe now, because this story changes everything. Inside the palace, the walls themselves seemed restless, as if carrying the memory of Diana's laughter and her screams. Catherine moved through the corridors like a shadow, her heels clicking against marble that once muted Diana's footsteps. In her hands, a leather-bound folder, sealed for years, hidden deep inside the royal archives. Within it lay sketches, notes, even unfinished letters written by Diana. Words no one had wanted the world to see. Words that could burn reputations to ash. It was here, in the bowels of the palace, that Catherine uncovered the first blueprint of rebellion. Diana had written not of jewels or titles, but of guardianship, of protecting her children's inheritance from a rod of manipulation. Catherine understood immediately. The monarchy had not just buried Diana's body, they had buried her voice. And so Catherine built a weapon out of memory. She announced the formation of the Wales Legacy Trust. But unlike the quiet philanthropy of the past, this was forged like a blade, overseen by Lady Rachel Montfort, a woman as loyal to Diana in death as she had been in life. The trust would answer only to Catherine. The collection of Diana's belongings, from her handwritten notes to her gowns, would no longer be under the suffocating weight of tradition. They would belong to Charlotte's future. When Catherine addressed the staff, her words were deliberate, sharp as a dagger hidden beneath velvet. This is not about ownership. This is about guardianship. The line struck the air like a bullet, echoing beyond palace walls. By morning, the Telegraph carried it as a headline. Commentators called it the first strike in the War of Memory. Royal aides exchanged anxious whispers. Some said Catherine had drawn a line in blood. But Catherine's move awakened something darker than applause. Deep within the palace machinery, loyalists to Charles and Camilla began plotting. They saw the Wales Legacy Trust not as reform, but as rebellion. Old men in tailored suits gathered in private chambers, muttering of treachery and a coup in silk gloves. Meanwhile, outside the palace gates, crowds were already stirring, chanting Diana's name, demanding her justice. The streets had begun to breathe fire. In Manchester, a mural of Diana appeared overnight on the side of a high-rise tower, her eyes painted as if watching over the city. In Cardiff, thousands carried candles and white roses through the rain, the crowd chanting, "She deserved better. She deserved better." But this wasn't the gentle grief of 1997. No, this was darker, more violent, more impatient. Protesters clashed with police. Barricades cracked under the weight of fists. The monarchy was no longer merely questioned. It was besieged. And through it all, Catherine stood at the center, holding Charlotte close, while the palace trembled under ghosts it could no longer silence. This was only the beginning. Inside the palace, the walls themselves seemed restless, as if carrying the memory of Diana's laughter and her screams. Catherine moved through the corridors like a shadow, her heels clicking against marble that once muted Diana's footsteps. In her hands, a leather-bound folder, sealed for years, hidden deep inside the royal archives. Within it lay sketches, notes, even unfinished letters written by Diana. Words no one had wanted the world to see. Words that could burn reputations to ash. It was here, in the bowels of the palace, that Catherine uncovered the first blueprint of rebellion. Diana had written not of jewels or titles, but of guardianship, of protecting her children's inheritance from the rod of manipulation. Catherine understood immediately. The monarchy had not just buried Diana's body, they had buried her voice. And so Catherine built a weapon out of memory. She announced the formation of the Wales Legacy Trust. But unlike the quiet philanthropy of the past, this was forged like a blade, overseen by Lady Rachel Montfort, a woman as loyal to Diana in death as she had been in life. The trust would answer only to Catherine. The collection of Diana's belongings, from her handwritten notes to her gowns, would no longer be under the suffocating weight of tradition. They would belong to Charlotte's future. When Catherine addressed the staff, her words were deliberate, sharp as a dagger hidden beneath velvet. This is not about ownership. This is about guardianship. The line struck the air like a bullet, echoing beyond palace walls. By morning, the Telegraph carried it as a headline. Commentators called it the first strike in the War of Memory. Royal aides exchanged anxious whispers. Some said Catherine had drawn a line in blood. But Catherine's move awakened something darker than applause. Deep within the palace machinery, loyalists to Charles and Camilla began plotting. They saw the Wales Legacy Trust not as reform, but as rebellion. Old men in tailored suits gathered in private chambers, muttering of treachery and a coup in silk gloves. Meanwhile, outside the palace gates, crowds were already stirring, chanting Diana's name, demanding her justice. The streets had begun to breathe fire. In Manchester, a mural of Diana appeared overnight on side a high-rise tower, her eyes painted as if watching over the city. In Cardiff, thousands carried candles and white roses through the rain, the crowd chanting, "She deserved better. She deserved better." But this wasn't the gentle grief of 1997. No, this was darker, more violent, more impatient. Protesters clashed with police. Barricades cracked under the weight of fists. The monarchy was no longer merely questioned. It was besieged. And through it all, Catherine stood at the center, holding Charlotte close, while the palace trembled under ghosts it could no longer silence. This was only the beginning. Camilla's exile was supposed to be quiet, a slow fading into irrelevance. But silence was never in her nature. From the walls of Highgrove, fortified now with guards and locked gates, she plotted. Her loyalists were not courtiers in lace, but bankers, old friends of media, and faceless men who thrived in shadows. Money flowed through offshore accounts, and soon whispers began to circle through Westminster. Catherine is overreaching. Charlotte is a puppet. The Wales Trust is a fraud. The counterattack had begun. First came the headlines. Tabloids that once celebrated Catherine suddenly turned venomous. Grainy photos of her with Charlotte, taken through telephoto lenses, were spun as stage-managed propaganda. Old rumors resurfaced, amplified by coordinated networks of fake accounts. Then came the footage, a doctored video showing Catherine supposedly berating staff, her voice twisted into cruelty. It was fake, but it spread faster than truth. The palace scrambled to contain it. Yet while Catherine fought the media firestorm, Camilla's operatives struck at the heart. On September 2nd, alarms screamed through Kensington Palace in the dead of night. Masked intruders had breached the eastern wing. They didn't come for jewels or art. They came for Diana's vault. The fight was swift and brutal. Guards clashed with black-clad figures, wielding knives and suppressed pistols. Marble floors cracked with the sound of gunfire. One loyal guard fell, blood painting the wall behind Diana's portrait. Another fought to the last breath, tackling an intruder before being cut down. Catherine was woken by Charlotte's terrified screams. She ran barefoot down the corridor, heart pounding, as gunshots echoed like war drums. Lady Rachel Montfort, ever loyal, ushered Charlotte into a hidden chamber behind the library wall, a panic room Diana herself had once demanded for William and Harry. But Catherine did not hide. She moved toward the chaos. In the eastern wing, smoke from flash grenades filled the air. Intruders reached the vault door, drilling into its lock with military precision. They carried explosives, ready to obliterate decades of Diana's preserved legacy. It wasn't theft, it was erasure. One intruder turned as Catherine appeared at the corridor's edge. Their eyes met for a split second before a guard slammed into him, knocking the device from his hand. The fight spiraled into madness, blades flashing, bones breaking, a spray of blood across Diana's gown sealed in glass. And then came the betrayal. A palace aide, one Catherine had trusted for years, stepped out of the smoke and barked, "Stand down! The vault is compromised." Guards hesitated, confusion rippling through their ranks. In that pause, the aide drew a pistol, not at the intruders but at Catherine. The shot missed by inches, shattering a marble column. Guards roared in fury, one dragging the traitor to the ground. But the damage was done. Catherine understood. The rot was inside. The monarchy's defenders were not all loyal. Some had already sold their allegiance to Camilla's shadow network. Finally, After minutes that stretched like hours, the last intruder fell. Blood and smoke stained the vault corridor. Bodies, loyal and treacherous alike, lay on the floor. Catherine stood amid the wreckage, chest heaving, as sirens wailed across the city outside. Charlotte emerged from the panic room, her face pale but unbroken. She looked at the carnage in silence before whispering to her mother. They wanted to take Grandma away again. Catherine held her close, her eyes burning with fury. She swore then that Diana's memory would never again be stolen, buried, or destroyed. Not by Camilla, not by Charles, not by anyone. The palace sealed the vault with triple security that night, turning it into something less like an archive and more like a bunker. But Catherine knew walls and locks could not stop betrayal. Not anymore. Beyond Highgrove, Camilla heard the reports. Her plan had failed, but her lips curled into a smile. She had drawn blood, and she had planted fear. For her, the war was only beginning. Meanwhile, Catherine looked at the blood-stained marble and whispered to Rachel Montford, "If they want war, we'll give them fire." September 1st, 2025. The date itself was a scar, the anniversary of Diana's death in Paris. Catherine had planned silence, a private gesture at Althorpe, her daughter at her side. But fate rarely allowed the Wales family privacy. The streets were already alive with unrest, burning with the rage of the Diana marches. London smoldered from nights of protest, while Edinburgh and Manchester stood on the edge of martial law. Still, Catherine went. The convoy rolled through backroads at dawn, black SUVs weaving across narrow lanes, drones overhead scanning for threats. Charlotte sat between Catherine and Lady Rachel Montford, clutching a single white rose in her hand. She was pale, but her eyes were steady, Diana's eyes reborn. But the enemies had not slept. Reports of armed groups shadowing the convoy flickered across radios. Intelligence warned of snipers positioned along the route. And as they neared Althorpe, the countryside felt less like a homecoming and more like a battlefield. When the gates opened, protesters surged forward, hundreds of them, some with roses, some with stones. Police lines fractured. Shouts turned into screams. Smoke bombs burst, turning the state grounds into a fog of chaos. The convoy screeched to a halt. Catherine threw open the SUV door, pulling Charlotte into her arms. Security agents shouted, forming a shield as bottles and bricks rained down. One protester lit a flare and hurled it, the red light streaking past Charlotte's face before it exploded against a statue. The crowd roared, half in mourning, half in fury. Yet Catherine refused to retreat. She gripped Charlotte's hand and pushed through the chaos, each step deliberate, until they reached Diana's memorial garden. The stone gleamed faintly through the smoke, waiting, defiant. And then came the gunfire. The first shot cracked from the tree line. A guard collapsed, blood spilling across the grass. Snipers. Screams tore through the crowd as chaos erupted. Protesters scattered in terror, while others in rage charged the barricades. Security agents shoved Catherine and Charlotte down, shielding them with their bodies as more shots ripped the air. But Catherine would not cower. Crawling forward through dirt and blood, she pulled Charlotte with her until they reached the stone. Charlotte knelt, trembling, and laid the white rose across her grandmother's name. Cameras, hidden live streaming, captured the moment. No tears, no theatrics, just defiance under fire. The image spread instantly across the globe, a child laying a rose for her grandmother while bullets flew overhead. It was no longer just tribute. It was a declaration of war. By nightfall, Britain was burning. Millions poured into streets across the nation. Diana's name became a battle cry. Westminster was locked down as protesters stormed barriers, some carrying effigies of Camilla, others chanting for Charles to abdicate. Fires rose in the skyline, and helicopters circled like vultures. International media called it the blood reckoning. The monarchy's sins had boiled over, and now its survival teetered on a knife's edge. Inside Balmoral, Charles watched live feeds in silence. His face was ashen, his hands trembling around a glass of whiskey. Camilla, isolated in Highgrove, raged at her staff, screaming a betrayal. But their words no longer mattered. The people had already rendered judgment in the streets. At Althorpe, Catherine stood by her daughter beneath a memorial, surrounded by smoke and soldiers. Her hair was matted with rain, her clothes streaked with dirt, yet her voice cut through the chaos as she addressed the cameras. This crown is not a jewel. It is a wound, and wounds demand healing, not denial. Diana will never be erased again. The broadcast was carried live across 50 nations. To some, it was an act of bravery. To others, treason. But to the crowds, it was fire in their veins. The monarchy had reached its breaking point. Blood had been spilled, truths exposed, and the people's patience burned to ash. And in that night of fire, Catherine and Charlotte became more than heirs. They became the storm itself. The smoke of September 1st never fully lifted. London smoldered for days, its skyline cut by black scars where monuments once stood pristine. In Manchester, rioters clashed with armed police until the streets ran slick with blood. Cardiff became a war zone. Edinburgh's castle walls echoed with chants that had not been heard since Jacobite uprisings. Britain was no longer mourning. It was tearing itself apart. And at the center of the chaos, one name remained untouchable: Diana. The images of Charlotte laying her rose under sniper fire had broken the world's breath. Donations to the Diana Charlotte Legacy Fund poured in with the fury of a flood. Within 4 days, £12 million had been raised. Within 2 weeks, the figure doubled. Supporters from 52 countries contributed, many writing furious notes condemning Charles and Camilla. One message scrawled across a wire transfer from New Delhi read, simply, "For Diana, for Charlotte, for war." Inside Kensington Palace, Catherine transformed mourning into machinery. Diana's vault was converted into an impregnable fortress. Its exhibits prepared not just for history, but for judgment. Guards patrol like soldiers, their rifles no longer ceremonial. Lady Rachel Montfort drafted charters, sealing the Wales family's independence from the broader royal household. And William, grim-faced, signed them on September 6th. The charter was unprecedented. For the first time, a branch of the monarchy broke free, seizing full custodial rights over legacy, memory, and estate. Diana was no longer an echo. She was law. Charles watched the announcement from Balmoral. Alone, his eyes were hollow, his frame hunched, his hands trembling with a glass of scotch that never emptied. Advisors begged him to appear in public, but each time he refused. His silence had already sentenced him. Every day he remained hidden. Catherine's shadow grew taller. As for Camilla, her name became a curse. Newspapers that once shielded her now erased her, scrubbing photos, retracting titles. She was sealed away at Highgrove, guarded not as a queen but as a prisoner. Windows shuttered. Staff rotated weekly to prevent leaks. Her world shrank to gilded walls and bitter whispers. Outside, her effigies burned in the streets. Inside, she clung to fading scraps of power, but even her allies abandoned her. The monarchy itself fractured. Loyalists called Catherine dangerous, a usurper. But polls told another story. On September 10th, Ipsos UK released figures that shocked even hardened historians. Catherine's approval soared to 89%, eclipsing Elizabeth II's final rating. 8 in 10 Britons believed Charlotte should inherit Diana's mantle, not just as a child, but as a sovereign in waiting. The people no longer bowed to crowns. They bowed to memory. And memory was a weapon Catherine wielded like fire. On September 15th, she stood before Diana's vault and declared, "Diana will no longer be buried by silence. Her truth lives here, guarded by those who loved her. This crown is not made of jewels, but scars, sacrifice, and survival, and we will carry it forward." Her words ignited the streets. Protesters turned into pilgrims, traveling to Kensington with roses and candles. Some came in mourning, others came in rage. But all came because Catherine had given them a queen they could believe in. Meanwhile, whispers of assassination grew. Intelligence intercepted chatter of extremist loyalists plotting to break the child crown. Twice, suspicious packages were intercepted at the palace gates. Catherine ordered no cover-ups. She faced the cameras and told the world, "If they come for us, let them come. We are not afraid." Her defiance only hardened the people's loyalty. For every threat, 10,000 more voices rose in support. Charles retreated further, a king in name only. His figure appeared in rare, haunting photographs. Walking alone through Balmoral's grounds, his face aged decades and weeks. The weight of his silence, his betrayal, his protection of Camilla, had destroyed him more thoroughly than any assassin could. And so, by the end of September, Britain lived in two worlds. One ruled by a fading king and his exiled consort, ghosts clinging to ashes. The other led by a woman without a crown, a child with a rose, and the memory of Diana burning like an eternal flame. The final letters to Kensington said it best. One, written in a child's handwriting, read, "Dear Charlotte, the crown isn't on your head. It's in your heart. And we follow hearts now, not thrones." Catherine kept that letter on her desk, not as decoration, but as prophecy, because the true crown had never been gold. It had never been tradition. It was grief turned into fire, betrayal turned into truth, memory turned into rebellion. And in 2025, that crown no longer belonged to Charles, nor Camilla, nor even the monarchy. It belonged to Diana, to Catherine, to Charlotte, and to the people who had finally risen to claim it. Like and subscribe to the channel if you want to know more secrets from behind the walls of Buckingham Palace.